Welcome back. One of the key defenders of President Jacob Zuma is Professor Sipho Seepe, who saw him as a leader who could radically transform South Africa for the better. Many would say he radically transformed South Africa, but for the worse, given the information that's coming out of the Judge Raymond Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. The news of the country being in recession is also being blamed on Zuma by the ANC itself. On other fronts, corruption charges against Jacob Zuma are now before the courts, and his name is looming large at the commission, as we've said. And Professor Seepe joins us to discuss this matter. Pleasure to have you with us, Prof.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I had to invite you, see, because I was getting a sense that we seem to be talking from only one perspective of the matter. Did you get that sense too?
Well, I get that sense, and I also think there's also mischaracterization of people like myself.
Yeah, so tell me.
I'm not the defender of President Zuma.
Yes.
I'm a defender of justice.
Okay.
I believe that all of us, even those of us who may not be liked, should get fair treatment.
Okay.
And I don't think he ever got a fair treatment.
Okay.
And I don't think I'm alone in this. I mean, COSATU used to think so, SSCP used to think so, the ANC used to think so. But it was really that if somebody is facing charges, there is a manner in which the justice system must behave. So the fact that is facing those charges that should have been dealt with almost 18 years ago is testament to the notion of justice delayed is justice denied. So it would be at least good that we have come to this, because the whole issue is that it is, as Vavi used to put it, that we should not try people through the media. There shouldn't be a trial by media. There should be, people must be subjected to the court process properly.
In principle, yes,
yeah,
Prof, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But where the Hawks and the NPA and others are not doing their work, what happens? People will fill up the missing gaps anyway, not that they're right.
But actually, that is where the real test of democracy is.
Yeah.
The real test of democracy is when we apply rules to even people that we do not like. Actually, the real test is when you have people you consider to be scandals, and then you apply the rules fairly to them. And once we move to a situation where we are being selective, then it becomes a problem. And I'm a defender of fair treatment. And if former President Zuma is guilty of what is alleged, then the person must be hauled before the courts, as we expect all of us. If I'm accused of wrongdoing, I do not want to be tried for a long time. Let me give you an example.
Yes.
Because we're going to talk about the commission. President Mbeki was accused by the media almost for a long time on the arms deal. And when he appeared before the commission, the Security Commission, he said, I'm glad to appear here because for 16 years, you guys have been beating the drum that my cabinet and I am corrupt. Present the evidence. And we must also understand the books were written. People's careers were blossomed on the basis of what they said about Mbeki. But once he appeared before the State Commission and he faced his accusers, they could not present evidence. Actually, Siridi said to them, please don't bring allegations. I want evidence. And the entire thing collapsed. So this is where you talk about fairness.
Okay, let's come back to the situation now, fairness or otherwise, Prof. There's the Zondo Commission. There are people who are appearing before that commission, and the finger seems to be pointing to President Zuma, most definitely to the Guptas.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think there is a doubt about what people have said. Remember, what we have heard so far, we've heard for the last 5 years. There's nothing new in terms of what has emerged. We have known what Maseko said. We've heard what Ngabisi said, but what Feigiman said. They've said all those things. But Tim, and that has been covered extensively by the media. But a commission of inquiry is supposed to do a number of things. One is supposed to get to the bottom of all these allegations to find the truth. That's the first thing. The second thing, it's supposed to provide the people who are being accused of an opportunity to, one, to cross-examine the accusers, secondly, also to present their own story. Then on the basis of that, then we can come to making a judgment. Simply to make a conclusion before we have had the other side may not be the way to go. And let me also indicate, all that we have had has been one side and hearsay. There has not been evidence.
I will come back to this point.
Yeah.
I want to go back to earlier this year when President Zuma was forced to step down.
Yeah.
Basically, it's not that he volunteered to step
Yeah.
down. Were you surprised at the way the ANC was dealt with him following Nasrec, and that they wanted him to step down, and that they basically sort of begged, cajoled, found other ways, means for him to establish the very Zondo commission that is now looking into state capture, which, with the preliminary evidence, appears to be going after him and those associated with
I
him?
think I'm glad that you put things in a sequence. First, you remember he signed on the Zondo commission.
Yeah.
And somebody who has nothing to fear would do that. And the ANC was correct to push him to that. And he actually said that he's glad to sign, but let us make sure that we deal with this matter of state capture. But he also said, let's deal with all the players in state capture. There should be no room for any almost complacency in dealing with it. No stone that should be left unturned. Instead, people said, no, let's limit it to the Guptas, but we'll deal with it. So that's the first thing. But in terms of his removal from the ANC, I did expect it. I was not surprised. Remember, the ANC, it's a mess of contradictions. And at any time, once you have one group that wins, that group wants to assert itself. So that's the first thing. The second issue is that the ANC felt that Jacob Zuma, and correctly so, is history. So you want to go forward by presenting a new candidate so that the candidate can build his own profile. This happens in all democracies. Margaret Thatcher was removed by her own party, despite the fact that she never lost any election. Tony Blair was removed by her own party. So this is simply party politics. And we must also accept that if somebody is history and that person also had other issues to answer, you don't want to continue to parade that person because it might, he might actually become a scapegoat to, and this we see. Even the ANC now is using it as a scapegoat. But this is the ANC that was willing to defend him all the time. So you should actually say the ANC is being hypocritical because for all these years, they sided with him.
But then, I mean, during the time when he was president, right, and the media generally and other commentators were saying, there's something wrong with the way the president conducts his affairs, his relationship with the Guptas. The ANN7 matter, for instance, which became Afro Worldview. Now, with what Pumla Williams said and Themba Maseko said, it's emerging that definitely what was being suspected was true about ANN7, the involvement of President Zuma and his friends.
I mean,
are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised. I think President Zuma himself did say he has never pretended that the Guptas are not his friends.
Yes.
And I think all of us, those who have engaged with the Guptas, I have not done so. But those who know them say maybe they've been boastful, but this is what happens with business people. It is not an accident. This is why every business person, when Mandela was around, they want to take pictures with Mandela. And politicians also want to take pictures with business people as a way of pretending to have certain influence. A politician will pretend that he has an influence over a businessman, but the businessman will also pretend to have a influence on the politician. This is why the Oppenheimers, the Ruperts, the Guptas will always find themselves gravitating towards the politicians. You saw how all the previous presidents, including Jacob Zuma, were gravitating towards somebody like Prof Sipho, because that's the nature of politics. But before I present business people negatively, I should indicate that the private sector and business people have a role to play in a democracy. And the issue here is we do not want business people to have undue influence in the state and in government, because when they do that, then they are undermining our democracy.
But one of the questions that I did ask in there was, were you surprised when you heard about how ANN7, ultimately Afro Worldview, was founded and funded?
No, actually I've always known that. I was not surprised. But as Pumla Williams herself which is something that she has forgotten. She used to write articles defending the existence of AN7. You know why? Because she's talked about the importance of diversity of perspectives. She talked about that you have the media that is largely white-owned. So having a new player in the game is important. Even the ANC government, when the AN7 was formed, when Afro-World was formed, it was the same ANC government where ministers were in place of its existence. So this pretense now of not understanding that it is actually problematic. I do think that the way it has been founded, the Zondo Commission must deal with that. It must go to the bottom. But the team, I'm a person who believes in diversity of perspectives. I mean, I get invited by BBC, I get invited by yourselves, I get invited by SABC. I appear in every platform to present a narrative that does not.
But here's the point, Professor Seepe, that even the SABC now, is stopped funding, and there was a time when they were looking for getting their money back from AN7 then, and other parastatals that were funding it said that it should not have been done, that it was irregular for the funding to be diverted to that channel.
Yeah, but this is where the whole notion of capture must come in, the issue of illegality. And that's why we must create forums where we engage these issues. And when we engage these issues, there must be rules of evidence. And where people have found that there's criminality, what you need to do, you go and open a case. And when you open the case, you follow it up. I mean, we've seen organizations like the Freedom Under Law, we've seen organizations like the Helen Suzman Foundation pushing where they can find illegality, including the DA. So it is the job of citizens not to start maligning people without evidence. This is why either you have the courts or you have a commission. But this commission was also brought precisely because of the noise that had been created, so that we can get to the bottom of this. But I don't think we're going to get into the bottom of the entire state capture, because if you look at it, this is really a commission around the Guptas. It is not, and Jacob Zuma, the former president. It is not about how the state has been captured. Let me give you an example. Your homeboy had, Brian Molefe had actually said, one of the interesting things in terms of contracts at Eskom, you find that about the 7% around there.
Let me interrupt you so that we can pick up on that thought, and you can have all the time to unpack it, to explain it.
Yeah.
That's Professor Sipho Seepe, who is our guest. And we're talking about the information that's coming out of the Zondo Commission and other reports that are there. I mean, we've got the SARS inquiry, for instance, which also connects to this discussion of state capture. Don't forget to participate in the conversation. On Twitter, the hashtag is the Modise Network. We'll be back. Welcome back. We continue our conversation with political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe, and you were making a point earlier on about what Brian Molefe found at Eskom.
Yeah, I think if you want to deal with the state capture, one of the things that you need to do is to say who were the players. And if you're going to take an organization or a company like Eskom or the state-owned enterprise, what you'll do is to say, let's look at all the beneficiaries of the contracts. You're not going to select only one that is convenient. And what Brian had said is that yes, there's been state capture, and the state has been captured for almost 50 years. There are 5 main companies in our country, or families, that are beneficiaries of this. And then you have the Guptas. Lynn Brown gave also an answer in Parliament under oath to say, if you look at the totality of contracting at Eskom, you find that 73% is in hands of white people, and 20% belongs to black people, 50 black companies that are competing, 50. And then there's about 7% that is related to the Guptas. So if you really want to talk about state capture, you're not going to limit yourself to the 7%.
Yeah.
You'll have to ask, what about the 93%?
Well, hopefully, following the work of the Zondo Commission, we'll get to that point.
Where those questions... One hopes that we'll deal with that.
Yes.
Yeah, so this, if we go that route,
yes,
then we'll be dealing with that which
let me ask you a question then, because you have been a commentator, analyst of the situation as it unfolds in South Africa. You watch the performance and behavior of the Zuma administration close quarters. The impression created, even as I said, the ANC through Enoch Godongwana says the recession is as a result of the performance of the government led by former President Jacob Zuma. How do you rate it?
I think what we need to do is really, you should have an economist, because I know somebody like Chris Malekane who can tell you that different story about the structure of our economy. Ramaphosa said if he takes over, in no time we'll be running an economic growth of 3%. And when some of us heard that, we said that this guy maybe he has no understanding of the economy. And if you listen and you read the reports of the World Bank, they'll tell you about the structural issues that have not been addressed. You talk to COSATU, if they are truthful, they'll all tell you also about the structural issues that are there in the economy. If you listen to Obama's speech, he talked about that the threat to development of any economic development will be inequality, economic inequality. And he said the threat to any democracy will also be economic inequality. So when we talk about these things, you need economists, you need people who can speak authoritatively and present facts. But to simply speak about the impressions, that is...
the recession is not an impression anymore. The currency is depreciating and job losses are increasing.
But to go and blame it on one person. And let's also... let me
tell you, the point I'm raising, the question that we said, it does not come from anywhere else. It comes from his own organization.
Let's take that own organization. Jacob Zuma was the president of the ANC. He was guided by the top six. He was guided by the National Working Committee. He was guided by the NEC. He was guided by the provincial structures. So if the ANC is wrong, you can't blame it on one person. And in that cabinet, you have cabinet ministers who have been in existence since Mandela, and they are still there. There's not been much change. Secondly, you also have a deputy president who was there for the last 5 years. The very same person who was defending Jacob Zuma in the last 5 years. So we need to have a much more of a sophisticated reading of the administration that it is a collective. Even the ANC itself talked about collective leadership. But right now, you know why? You know why they're doing this? Is because they are eyeing the elections, and then they were saying, let us find the scapegoat. In the same way that the very same ANC used Mbeki as a scapegoat, that once he's gone, all will be hunky-dory. Now Zuma is gone. Now you find the situation where they said, if he goes, things will be better. Things are not getting better. So they will say, fall back to Zuma, that if there's no rain, there's drought, blame Zuma. If there's the rent collapses, blame Zuma. Remember, he was removed for those reasons.
But here's the point, another point I want to raise with you specifically, Prof. Because you and others spoke about radical economic transformation and said that the president was being criticized because of his aggressive approach to making sure that he radically transformed the economy. You still believe that?
Let's put it this way. It is not even about me believing. It's about the ANC having taken that position. The very same ANC has taken resolutions in its meeting, in its own collective wisdom, to say our approach is going to be that of radical economic transformation. And that was explained of what it means. And there are actually two perspectives. One of those is radical economic transformation is supported by black business in this country. It's supported by black people in this country, precisely because we are looking at 20 years down the line. What are the conditions of black people? One, you don't find black people occupying key positions in management. You don't find black people, black companies succeeding. We have actually regressed.
Yes.
So the point is, the idea of radical economic transformation is dictated by a reality. The reality that says, despite democracy, despite advancement,
Yeah.
we have made little progress.
But is it true and fair to say that the president, the former president, was being criticized because he was aggressively pursuing the...
No, I don't think I've ever said that. But secondly, the point I was making is that
Yes.
the ANC itself had embarked on that. Actually, remember, the radical economic transformation does not start in Nasrec. It actually started once President Zuma took over. There was a talk about moving to a second transition, and that transition will be characterized by radical socio-economic transformation. And if you think about it, all it says, when you say something is radical, you're simply saying you are also making an assessment that the previous efforts have not worked.
Yes.
So you want something different. So
I'm asking you that question because, today people, again, in the state of this recession and the other matters that you spoke about that require economists to unpack, they say, oh, so this is the outcome of the radical economic transformation then. The information that's coming out about Trillion, for instance, the information about McKinsey, the information about Bain at SARS, the money that seemingly has fled or left our economy, the fact that the Guptas are not here in the country at the moment and are refusing to appear in person before the Zondo Commission. All of these things are taken together and then the argument is made. So is this how it looks like?
Yeah, but actually, Tim, we must be able to separate policy and mischief. The ANC adopted the radical economic transformation because the ANC's government has failed to transform our lives economically. And what they're saying is that let us find ways of doing things differently. That's why at the moment you're talking about the land expropriation without compensation, because the land is still in the hands of the minority. So it is something that has to be addressed, and President Ramaphosa subscribes to that. That's why he calls the land issue as a land theft and original sin that must be addressed. So we must separate that from issues that may lend themselves to criminality. You can pursue a policy that is correct, and even if it is incorrect, but you could also be engaged in activities that may lend themselves into spaces of law enforcement. So let us not undermine that policy.
Is there one, two-part question?
Yeah.
One, is there a case to be pursued here, right? A criminal matter to be pursued against the Guptas and or President Zuma, number one. Number two, what do you think of the performance of President Ramaphosa currently and going forward? And then we end it peacefully like that.
Well, if there was a case to be made, the people would have approached the law enforcement agencies, would be having people in handcuffs, they would be having people addressing themselves to those issues. President Zuma has been charged, and he'll be appearing before the court. He'll have to answer that issue. And this is an issue that has been going on for 17 years. Yeah. Then in terms of President Ramaphosa, it is too early to actually make the judgment. But all I know is he has not been able to make a clear pronouncement of where he stands. That's why the EFF could stand up and ask him, Chief, which policy are you following? Are you following radical economic transformation? What about the NDP? And even the ANC has criticized him about the New Deal, the New Dawn. People say we don't know what it is. But what they know is that when he gets an opportunity, he takes a walk.
When he gets an opportunity, he takes a walk?
Yeah, he's always walking. He invites people to a walk. What people want is ideas. What people want is tell us how we're going to take this. And simply getting investment outside is just one part. Yeah. But no country has ever succeeded on the basis of the generosity of external forces.
That's Professor Sipho Seepe. Thank you very much for having been my guest. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, that's all we had for you this evening, and thank you for having been with us on the Modise Network. And join us again next week, Saturday, at 6 p.m. And from us, good night to you.